From the moment he was born, Marcus's life was supposed to be filled with endless possibilities. He grew up with dreams, ambition, and the love of his family guiding him. But it wasn't long before the very person who was supposed to nurture and protect him, the person he trusted most in the world, began making choices that would haunt him forever. His mother, in her infinite wisdom and misguided love, made a decision that shaped his future in ways he could never have imagined. What began as an act of love became a curse that ruined his life. From the moment Marcus was born, his mother, Clara, had big plans for his future. He was her only child, and from the start, she envisioned a life filled with accomplishment, prestige, and recognition for him. Clara wasn't just a typical mother, she was a woman driven by ambition. She had dreams that were unfulfilled during her youth, dreams that she wanted to live vicariously through Marcus. Clara had always believed in the power of education. She had worked hard to give Marcus the best opportunities, ensuring that he attended top-tier schools, had access to the best tutors, and was immersed in environments that would challenge and push him to his limits. His success, in her mind, would reflect her hard work and sacrifice. It would be the ultimate validation of everything she had done to provide him with a better life than she had. As a young boy, Marcus excelled academically. It was clear that he was a natural, a child gifted with intellect and curiosity. His teachers praised him for his ability to grasp complex concepts quickly. He was a star student, someone who would undoubtedly succeed in the world. Clara couldn't have been prouder. Each report card, each award, each certificate of achievement was a confirmation that her dream for him was on track. He was living the life she had always wanted, and she was thrilled to witness it unfold. But as Marcus grew older, the weight of Clara's expectations began to grow heavier. The early years were full of joy and accomplishment, but as he entered his teenage years, the pressure to succeed began to feel suffocating. Clara had always been the one to set the bar high. Excellence was the only option. She would constantly remind him of how much she had sacrificed to give him the life he now enjoyed. It wasn't just about doing well, it was about being the best. Marcus quickly learned that his worth in his mother's eyes was tied to his achievements. He wasn't just Marcus, he was the reflection of Clara's ambitions, a symbol of everything she had worked so hard for. His grades, his talents, and his success were all a way for her to prove that her choices had been right. She would often say, "You'll be someone great, Marcus. You'll make me proud." At first, this praise was encouraging, and Marcus loved making his mother happy. He loved hearing her tell him how proud she was of him. But as the years passed, those words started to feel like a burden. Every time he came home with a perfect report card, every time he was praised for being the best in his class, Clara was always the first to remind him, "This is just the beginning, Marcus. You can go so much further." His accomplishments, no matter how significant, were never enough. Clara always pushed for more, always aimed for higher goals. He was expected to excel not just for his own future but for hers as well. She wanted him to become a doctor, a lawyer, someone who could provide her with the recognition she had longed for but never received. It became clear to Marcus that no matter how much he achieved, there would always be a next step, a next level, that would need to be conquered. While his peers started to develop hobbies and interests outside of their academic achievements, Marcus found himself consumed by his studies. He didn't have the time for sports or friends, and any attempt to stray from the path Clara had laid out for him was quickly shut down. He would try to express interest in other things, like drawing or playing music, but his mother would always steer him back to the path she had chosen for him. She didn't have the patience for things she deemed as distractions. Music and art were frivolous in her eyes, mere hobbies that would not bring him the success he was destined for. What mattered was making sure he stayed focused on his future, the future that she had envisioned. Marcus began to feel lost, as though he was living someone else's life. He found himself drifting through his teenage years, excelling academically but feeling increasingly disconnected from the world around him. Every achievement, every step closer to his mother's dream, brought him further away from his own sense of self. He was doing everything right, according to her standards, but nothing about it felt fulfilling. His mind wandered to other possibilities, other futures that didn't involve living out his mother's dream. But he quickly pushed those thoughts aside, knowing that they would never be understood by Clara. She had a vision, and Marcus was a part of it. As high school graduation neared, Marcus found himself on the cusp of a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He had been accepted into a prestigious university, the first step in fulfilling his mother's dream of him becoming a successful doctor. It was everything Clara had hoped for, everything she had worked for. But deep down, Marcus was not excited. He didn't feel the passion for medicine that his mother seemed to think he had. What he really wanted was something different, a career in the arts, where he could express himself creatively. He wanted to paint, to design, to build something that was his own. But he couldn't bring himself to tell his mother. He was too afraid of disappointing her, of letting her down after everything she had done for him. So, with a heavy heart and a sense of dread in his chest, Marcus accepted the path that had been laid out for him. He enrolled in the medical program, following his mother's dreams while quietly suppressing his own. Every step he took toward becoming the doctor his mother envisioned felt like a step further away from the man he wanted to become. But as he sat in the lecture halls, year after year, trying to keep up with the grueling pace of medical school, Marcus began to realize the cost of his mother's ambitions. The path she had chosen for him was not his own, and as he struggled to find purpose in a life he never asked for, the weight of his mother's choices began to crush him. In the end, Marcus realized that the life his mother had built for him was never meant to be his. It was a life shaped by her dreams, her desires, and her sacrifices, but not his. He had lost himself in the pursuit of her vision, and now, at the precipice of his future, he had to ask himself, would he continue to live the life she had planned, or would he finally step into the one he had always dreamed of? As Marcus entered his final year of high school, the pressure that his mother, Clara, had placed on him was reaching a boiling point. She had always pushed him to achieve, but now, with graduation approaching and the looming prospect of university, the weight of her expectations was becoming unbearable. The bright future she had planned for him was just within reach, but it didn't feel like a triumph to Marcus, it felt like a prison. Clara's vision for Marcus had always been crystal clear. He was to be a successful doctor, someone who would rise to prominence in society. To her, anything less would be a failure, and anything that wasn't part of that plan was dismissed as a distraction. As a child, Marcus had enjoyed excelling at school. His intelligence had earned him praise and admiration from his teachers and peers. But as the years went on, his passion for learning began to fade. It wasn't that he didn't love knowledge, it was that he no longer found joy in it when it felt like nothing more than a means to meet his mother's expectations. Marcus had always been good at subjects like mathematics and science. They came naturally to him, and his mother reveled in that. She often boasted about his intelligence to friends and family, showing off his accomplishments as though they were her own. Every achievement of Marcus's was viewed as a personal victory for Clara. His high marks and academic success were not simply his, it was her dream being realized through him. But as Marcus matured, his inner conflict deepened. He was no longer a child who blindly followed his mother's wishes. He had his own ideas, his own dreams, but they didn't align with what Clara wanted for him. Deep down, Marcus yearned for a life in the arts. He wanted to paint, to design, to express himself creatively. But every time he tried to entertain these thoughts, his mother's voice echoed in his mind, "This is the future you're supposed to have, Marcus. You're meant for something greater." The weight of those words felt like chains around his chest, holding him back from exploring the path that would truly fulfill him. As the months passed and graduation day drew closer, Marcus began to feel suffocated by his mother's plans for him. It wasn't just the academic pressure that was overwhelming, it was the constant reminder that his success was her success, and his failure would reflect poorly on her. Every conversation seemed to circle back to his future career. "Have you chosen your university yet, Marcus?" Clara would ask with a smile, but it was the kind of smile that made him feel like he was being watched under a microscope. "The medical program at Cambridge is perfect for you. You'll be great, just like your father always wanted." Marcus's father had passed away when he was young, and ever since, Clara had been adamant about ensuring that Marcus fulfilled the dream of becoming a doctor, a dream that his father had shared. To her, this wasn't just about ambition, it was about honoring his memory. The thought of disappointing Clara terrified Marcus, but more than that, the thought of sacrificing his own happiness for her approval was slowly eating away at him. On the outside, Marcus played the part. He studied hard, getting the grades his mother demanded. But on the inside, he was crumbling. He could feel the walls closing in around him as he walked tirelessly on the same path his mother had set for him. What once had been a source of pride now felt like a heavy burden. He began to withdraw from his friends, who noticed the change in him. The carefree boy who had once loved to explore his creative side was now replaced by a young man consumed with the pressure to perform. He no longer had the time or energy for his passions. Everything was about achieving the next goal, the next accolade. The more success Marcus achieved, the more distant he became from his true self. He couldn't remember the last time he had picked up a paintbrush or a guitar. His dreams of creating, of expressing himself through art, seemed childish in comparison to the rigorous demands of his academic life. Every time he would close his eyes, he could see himself as a painter, an artist traveling the world to showcase his work, or as a designer, crafting beautiful pieces that would inspire others. But when he opened his eyes, reality hit him with full force. Those dreams were too impractical, too far removed from the secure, successful future his mother had planned for him. His desire to please her overshadowed his own desires, and as a result, he was slowly losing himself. It wasn't just the career choice that caused tension between them. Clara's belief that she knew what was best for Marcus began to stretch into other areas of his life. She was always present at his school events, pushing him to be the best, not for his own sake but for the reputation it would give her. Every time Marcus received an award, Clara would insist on taking photographs, sending them to family and friends with a message that read, "Look at what my son has achieved." She didn't just want Marcus to succeed, she wanted everyone to know that she was the mother of a future doctor, a success story waiting to unfold. One evening, Marcus was sitting in the living room, flipping through a book about art that he had secretly bought for himself. His mother entered, and immediately, he felt the tension rise. Clara glanced at the book in his hands, her expression turning cold. "What's this?" she asked, her tone sharp. "This isn't the kind of thing you should be reading, Marcus. You need to focus on your future, not waste your time with distractions." Her words stung, but Marcus had heard them all too many times before. He closed the book, pushing it aside as if it were nothing more than a trivial object. "I'm just trying to relax, Mom. It's not a big deal." Clara's face softened, but only slightly. "I just want what's best for you. I'm doing this because I love you. You'll thank me later when you have your career, your home, your future all set up." But as Clara spoke, Marcus realized that he didn't want the future she was offering him. He didn't want the life of success that she had planned. He wanted to break free from the suffocating expectations and pursue the life that he longed for, a life where he could be true to himself. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the constant pull of her desires for him. He was stuck, torn between the dream she had crafted for him and the dream he had secretly nurtured for himself. The battle between pleasing his mother and following his own path grew stronger each day. But as graduation approached, Marcus knew one thing for sure: he could no longer continue down a road that wasn't his own. The time had come to make a choice. Would he live for his mother, or would he finally choose to live for himself? As Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the university acceptance letter in his hands, a wave of dread swept over him. The path that his mother had set for him was now closer than ever. The weight of her expectations seemed unbearable. His heart raced as he thought about the future that awaited him, a future that was being built for someone he didn't feel he was. Every moment in his life had been steered by the dream his mother had crafted for him, but now, with the choice before him, he had to ask himself, could he continue living this lie, or was it time to take control of his own life? The pressure had been building for years, but now it felt like it was reaching its breaking point. His entire academic career had been dictated by Clara's vision, and now, as graduation loomed, Marcus knew that he had to make a decision that would affect the rest of his life. The university that had accepted him was prestigious, the kind of institution that his mother had always dreamed of for him. It was the perfect opportunity, one that would surely bring him the success she had envisioned for him. Yet, deep down, Marcus was terrified. The idea of becoming a doctor, or following his mother's dream, no longer felt like his own. It felt suffocating, as if he was being boxed into a life that wasn't his to live. That night, as he lay in bed, the thought of his future weighed heavily on him. He could hear his mother's voice echoing in his mind, "You're meant for greatness, Marcus. You'll thank me one day for pushing you." She had said those words to him countless times over the years. He could never forget the proud smile on her face when he received his acceptance letter. To her, it was proof that all her sacrifices had been worth it, that her dreams were coming to fruition. But for Marcus, it wasn't a moment of celebration. It felt like a trap. He had been working toward this moment for so long, but now that it was here, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling of dissatisfaction that lingered in his chest. The next morning, Marcus sat in the kitchen, the same letter still clutched tightly in his hands. His mother entered, a smile spreading across her face as she saw the envelope. "So, you've made your decision, haven't you?" she said, her voice filled with pride. "This is the beginning of your future, Marcus. I always knew you'd make me proud." Marcus looked up at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't bring himself to speak. He had imagined this moment countless times in his head, the moment he would finally tell his mother that he couldn't follow through with her plans. But now, sitting across from her, it felt impossible. How could he disappoint her after everything she had done for him? How could he tell the woman who had sacrificed so much for him that he didn't want the life she had planned? But as he looked at his mother, the proud glimmer in her eyes, he realized he couldn't continue down this path. His dreams of becoming a doctor weren't his, they were hers. His passion for creativity, for art, had always been stifled by the constant pressure to excel academically. He had never been allowed to explore his true passions. Instead, he had lived his life for her approval, for her dreams. And now, as he stood on the precipice of his future, he knew he couldn't live that way anymore. "I can't go to medical school, Mom," Marcus said, his voice trembling as the words left his mouth. Clara froze, her eyes narrowing as she processed what he had just said. "What do you mean, Marcus? This is what we've worked for all these years. This is your future. You can't just throw it all away." "I'm not throwing it away," Marcus replied, his voice gaining strength. I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to live the life you've planned for me. I've been pretending for so long, but it's not what I want. I want to pursue art. I want to create, to design, to do something that makes me happy. And I can't do that if I keep following this path you've set for me." Clara's face flushed with anger as she stood up from the table, the pride in her eyes quickly replaced with disbelief. "Art? Are you serious, Marcus? After everything I've done for you, this is what you want. Art is nothing but a hobby, a dream for people who don't know what real success is. You have the chance to be someone important, to build a life that matters. And you're throwing it all away for something that's foolish. You think I want you to end up like one of those people who can barely make ends meet? Do you think I want you to waste your life on something as insignificant as art? Her words cut deeply, but Marcus had heard them all before. They had always echoed in his mind, but now he refused to let them control him any longer. His mother's vision for him had been strong, but it wasn't his vision. It was hers. And he couldn't keep living for her. He had tried for so long, but he realized that it was impossible to please someone when their dreams were so different from your own. I know you want the best for me, Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. But I have to live my own life. I can't keep following someone else's dream. I have to follow my heart, Mom. And if that means disappointing you, then I'm willing to take that risk. I'm choosing art. Clara stood there in stunned silence, her face pale. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. She had always been the one with the plan, the one who knew what was best. But now, with her son's future hanging in the balance, she was forced to confront the reality that he had a choice that didn't align with her own desires. Marcus didn't know what would come next, but in that moment, he felt a sense of freedom that he had never known before. For the first time in his life, he was making a decision for himself. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. He had finally chosen a path that was his own. As Marcus left the kitchen, the weight of his decision was still heavy on his heart, but he knew he had made the right choice. He had taken the first step toward living a life that would be his, not his mother's, not anyone else's. It was his. And that was the most important thing. The weeks that followed Marcus's confrontation with his mother were a whirlwind of emotions. Clara, still reeling from the shock of her son's decision, became distant. The dynamic that had once been so open, where Marcus felt free to share his thoughts and feelings, had suddenly turned cold and strained. He found himself walking on eggshells around her, constantly battling the guilt that gnawed at his conscience. Despite knowing deep down that he had made the right decision for himself, he couldn't help but feel that his relationship with his mother had changed forever. Clara's disappointment was palpable. Her pride in Marcus had been tied to the idea that he would fulfill the dream she had built for him. She had invested so much of herself in shaping his future, and now that he had chosen a path that didn't align with her expectations, she was struggling to understand him. For Clara, the concept of success was deeply tied to societal standards, prestige, power, and wealth. Art, in her eyes, was a frivolous pursuit that wouldn't provide her son with the security and admiration she had always hoped for him. Every conversation Marcus had with her after his decision felt like a struggle. Clara would often ask, "Are you sure about this? Are you willing to throw away everything you've worked for?" The question was always asked with a tone of disbelief, as if she couldn't fathom why her son would choose something that seemed so uncertain. It wasn't just about the choice itself, it was about the perceived rejection of everything she had worked so hard to achieve. One evening, Marcus sat at the dining table, staring at his art supplies scattered across the table. He had started to spend more time painting and sketching, trying to channel the creativity that had been stifled for so long. It wasn't easy, there was still a part of him that questioned his decision, wondering if he was making a mistake. But each stroke of the brush or pencil helped him find peace in the midst of the chaos. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he was reconnecting with who he truly was, something that had been lost for so many years. But his peace was shattered when Clara walked into the room. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a stern look on her face. "I don't understand, Marcus," she said, her voice filled with frustration. "Why are you doing this? I gave you everything, I gave you opportunities, and now you're throwing it all away for this. She gestured to the art supplies on the table, her face a mixture of confusion and anger. You think you can live like this? Do you really think you're going to make a living off of this nonsense? The words stung, but Marcus had grown tired of the constant battle. He had spent so long trying to appease her, trying to meet her expectations, and he couldn't do it anymore. I'm not throwing it all away, Mom, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm choosing a path that makes sense for me. You've always pushed me to follow your dreams, but I have my own. And I can't keep living a life that's not mine. Clara's face twisted with emotion. You're being selfish, Marcus. I've sacrificed so much for you, giving up my own happiness so that you could have the life you've always wanted. And now, you're choosing this. This is the thanks I get. Marcus felt the familiar pang of guilt, but this time, he stood his ground. I'm not being selfish, Mom. I'm finally living for myself. I've been living for you all these years, trying to meet your expectations, and I've lost who I am in the process. I can't do that anymore. Clara's eyes softened for a moment, and Marcus could see the pain in them. She wasn't angry just because of his decision, she was hurt because she felt rejected. The future she had planned for him was crumbling, and she couldn't understand why he didn't see it the same way she did. You don't understand what this means, Marcus, she said softly. I've spent my entire life building this dream for you. You're the one who's supposed to carry it forward. I wanted you to be successful, to be someone who would make me proud. But now, you're choosing a life that has no guarantees. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to remain calm despite the growing frustration inside him. Success is different for everyone, Mom. It's not just about status or money. It's about doing what makes you happy. For me, that's creating art. I'm not asking you to understand, but I need you to respect my decision. The silence that followed was heavy, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara's expression softened, but the pain in her eyes remained. I just want you to be happy, Marcus. I don't want you to make the same mistakes I did, she said quietly. I don't want you to regret your choices. Marcus looked at her, his heart aching for the woman who had given so much of herself for his sake. He knew that her fears came from a place of love, but he also knew that he couldn't continue to live in her shadow. He had to take control of his own life, even if it meant disappointing her. I'm not making a mistake, Mom, he said gently. This is what I need to do. I'm not going to regret this. Over the next few weeks, things between Marcus and his mother remained tense, but a shift began to take place. Clara still didn't fully understand his decision, but she slowly began to accept it. She saw the passion that lit up Marcus's face whenever he talked about his art. Slowly, the anger and disappointment began to soften, and though she never fully embraced his choice, she started to respect it. Marcus knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He was leaving behind the life his mother had planned for him, and he had no guarantees of success. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He was living authentically, and that was all that mattered. His future was uncertain, but it was his to shape. And with each brushstroke, he was starting to rebuild the life he had always dreamed of, one that was true to himself.